Okay, so we're continuing on Siman Tzadik Aleph Hilchos Basar B'Chalav Sif Hey. Sif Hey, pretty much all the way towards the end of the Siman, talks about Melicha. Melicha is another form where foods can become asur as a result of contact with each other. Melach, the salt, is very powerful. It brings about a certain absorption into that where it touches. In other words, that which is maluach, that which is salty, and we will see that there's different reasons why somebody may want to salt a piece of meat, but it doesn't have to necessarily be meat. Even cheese, even anything that is salty, the salt has the koach to be maflit and be mafliya its time to something which is tofel. So that which is unsalty is called a tofel with a tof, as opposed to tofel with a tes, even though they could both mean it was the same thing. That which is unsalty, right? I think that's the way they spelled it over here. Just double check here. Anyway, yeah, tofel over here is with a tof, meaning unsalty. Unsalted, right. Whereas tofel with a tes is secondary, not as important. So here we're dealing with tofel with a tof. Just a little small note on the difference between two similar words. So the salt has the koach to do two things. It has the koach to be mavliya maflit its tam into that which is tofel, and it also has the power, the koach, to release the dam, the tzir, the brine, the liquids that are within the food item out. It has the koach to expel it, to release it out. And that is why we salt before we can eat it with the thicker salt, because that is the only way you can remove, other than roasting, of course, I should say, other than roasting it, that is the only way you can remove the blood which needs to be removed from within the meat. Now, even though we said that these are the only two functions of the salt, or these are the two capabilities of the salt, what's unique about salt is that even though it has so much koach to bring out its tam and to be mavliya maflit that tam into something else, it does not have the koach to take from that which is tofel its tam. Right? In other words, it's strong, it has a certain koach to be mavliya maflit, but it does not have that much koach that it can also draw from that which is unsalted its tam. It can only put into that which is unsalted the tam that it has.
It can draw taste out of that which is being,
right,
transfer that taste into that. It's a one-way street.
It's a one-way street. Now the ran, there is a shita, the ran, and if we get to it, we'll learn it in Hilchos Melicha, where the Mechaber says that you can be concerned about that, the Ramah as well, where when things are touching each other and you have something, a kosher piece and a non-kosher piece, really touching, that even though the one that's treif is the unsalted one, it could be a problem, according to the Ran.
Now, how would one-way transfer work if they always would be touching?
No. Yes, but sometimes they're not touching, and you have the tzir coming down. In other words, they may be in close proximity to each other, and there is tzir from the treifa one coming.
From
the treifa one coming down. In other words, so there is contact, but not between the pieces of. There is that possibility, but right now we don't need to get into.
How would that play?
In other words, that according to the Ran, the main concern, according to the way we learn the Ran, would be when the pieces of meat are actually touching. That is when there is a tzad to be machmir.
The treif one is
the tofel, right? But when there is distance, even though there may be contact between the blood and the tzir and all that, then we may not have to be machmir. Because if the other one, if the treif one is salty, even though they're not touching, but the tzir is coming down, we're talking about tzir, or we're talking about salty blood, it could be a problem even though the pieces of meat are not touching. See what I mean? That's what I mean. So there's a chiluk over there in the shita of the Ran. But we're not going to concern ourselves right now because we hold that if it's a one-way street, like you said it. The one that's salty affects the one that's unsalty, and it doesn't work the other way around.
And if I understand you correctly, this is
when they're touching, yes. Now, if they're both salty, of course, then they're both salty. Yeah.
Then they're affecting each
Right.
other. Both.
Now, what's this koach of the salt? The koach of the salt, the Chachamim call it meliach keroteach. Something that is salty is like it's roteach, boiling. It's hot. What kind of boiling? Keroteach detzli.
It's like
In other words, what koach of roteach does it have? Of retzicha? Like a tzli, like a roast. As opposed to what? As opposed to, like you said, it's not bishul. Wait a minute. If that's the case, how much will it aser? If meliach has a koach of roteach, and we say it's mavliah, it can be mavliah and maflit to something which is tofel, how much can it go?
I'm guessing kedei netila.
Why would you say kedei klipa if I just said kedei, it's meliach keroseach kedetzli? How much is it by tzli? Kedei netila, right? So, but the halacha is, nevertheless, for some reason, yes, it's meliach keroseach like tzli, it's hot, but you only take off a kedei kli.
No, boy, did I get lucky with this one.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure. I said both, and then
Right.
it is both.
It is both.
So it's one thing. So it asks kedei netila, but you don't.
No. It does not asa kedei netila. In other words, it resembles tzli.
Ein tzli is kedei netila.
Tzli is kedei netila.
But by
By Melicha, the din is klipa.
Uh-huh.
Eventually, we'll talk about shaman. Shaman is again throws everything off.
Yeah.
Okay. But right now, we're just talking about the din. By tzli, it's kedei netila. By klipa, it's by Melicha, it's kedei klipa.
Maybe
No. So therefore, no. Therefore, what the question is, why not take kedei netila by Melicha too?
Right.
The answer is that Melicha is roiseach like tzli. They use that term only lafuke so that we can exclude bishul. So they wanted you to compare this to something and not to something else. So they told you it's like tzli, but it's not like tzli in every respect. It's less than tzli. Do you know what I mean? So it's in a sense it's like tzli. It's hot, but it's not like tzli that we can be more lenient. It's only kedei klipa. Okay, so that answers why here you say it's like tzli, but you only ask kedei klipa. And the answer is yes, it's not exactly like tzli all the way. We just compared it to tzli, so you should not say that meliach is keroseach, but what's roseach? Oh, bishul. No, it's not bishul. It's more like tzli, but it's not exactly like tzli either because it only asks kedei klipa. That's all. Very simple. Most of these halachas you can find in Siman Samach Tes and Siman Ayin, but we did discuss some of it also in Hilchos Taaruvot. In Hilchos Taaruvot, of course, we discussed the various forms of contact, including kavush, tzli, and melicha, and tatar gavar. I mean, everything. So that's why, you find it briefly in Basar bechalv too, even though the basic halachas and the various shitas are found in Hilchos Melicha, Siman Samach Tes, and Siman Ayin. All right. Now that we know what the koach of melach is, we have to discuss two additional important points. And I think we will do that before we read the inside. In this way we will already know ahead what the Mechaber and the Ramah hold. We have to find out how much salt is required. We need to find out also not only how much salt is required, but how much time does the salt have to sit on it. How much time? And does it make a difference 3 hours later? Does the salt have the same koach then as it had in the beginning? In other words, now that we know the melach does have a certain koach in being mavliya maflit, but under what circumstances can it do that? So the various seifim that remain from Siman Tzadik Aleph discuss the various scenarios. What if one is a liquid? What if one is a solid? What about the tatar gavar? Does that apply here? So this is what we will discuss now, and that will give us a better understanding of what's going on in the various seifim. So let's begin with when does the meat become roseach? We said meliach keroteach. When does it become roteach? Right away? As soon as you salted it, it's already roseach? Or does it take time? And if it takes time, how much time? This is a big machlokes. There appears to be one tzad that says meliach is keroseach only after it has done its job. In other words, you're salting a piece of meat to draw out the blood, right? Once it has drawn out all that blood, then it's roteach. Not right away. The other tzad holds, no. Once it begins the process of drawing out the blood, then it's already becoming roteach. As the Aruch HaShulchan says, the Ran is the shita that says it's only later. And the Aruch HaShulchan says basically, I don't understand. Why treat it as roteach later on if it succeeds in drawing out the dam, zemotzi dam, then it's already roteach. In other words, look what's happening. It's already something is going through it. Why just leave it? Why say that it becomes roteach then? But obviously there is the opinion, the Ran, that says yes, you're right. It's able to draw out blood, but it does not have its full koach until after a certain amount of time. What is that certain amount of time? 18 minutes. As the Mechaber says, the shear of a Melicha, the minimum, is kishi'ur mil, alichat mil. As long as it takes an average person to walk a mile, a little less than a mil is actually a little bit less than a mile, between a kilometer and a mile. How much is that? 18 minutes, the Meforshim say. Okay. Now we do know that other than bishul, and even in bishul, you put something under fire, it doesn't affect what you put in there right away, unless you see bubbles. It takes time for something to eat. Even when you're baking, they tell you there's recipes, preheat the oven, because it's not right away 350. You put it right, remember this is a question that came up many times. What happens if you put something taref, or something not kosher into the pot, but you immediately took it out? Does it happen right away? Right? So it all depends if it's already yat soledet or not, because yat soledet appears to be enough of heat to begin to cause a problem. But especially if you have bubbles, for sure it would be right away. The question is, what if it's not bubbling yet? What if it's not hot? You just turn on the flame, by mistake, and you right away took it out. But did the tam come out already? No. Possibly no. Right? But what happens, is that true about Melicha? Kavush, we know it takes 24 hours. When we learned about Kavush, Kemevushal, Kavush also has koach. Kemevushal, we said, even more than but it takes 24 hours, not less. That's interesting. It takes time. And by tzir, by brine, it's much faster. It could be about 6 minutes. There is a shiur like that, and that's going to be a question in the Mechaber that we will try to deal with maybe on Thursday. That takes us back to Hilchos Taaruvot. He says like this: Imu kavush betoch tzir, not maim. The maim we said 24 hours, right? But if something is kavush in tzir, or betoch chometz, strong chometz, im shahak kedeshi teneno ala or v'yartiach. If you left it so long that as long as it would take to put water on the fire and make it boil, then it's kemevushal. But less than that, it's only kedei klipo. How much is that? 6 minutes. The period of time that it will take for water to boil, the basic shear is 6 minutes. So if it was sitting 6 minutes in tzir, not water, so tzir obviously makes it faster. So apparently what we see from this, so this is going to be a question in the Mechaber. How come over there he says that there is a shear by tzir that, anyway, and here he's going to say it's a different shear. But the Melicha, it's a question too. It's the same kind of a question. When does it happen? When is there the koach in the melach? So we have these two shitas. So the Kreti Ufleti, Rabbi Elyahu explains the shita of the Ran, that the reason why the Ran says that it's only after the fact, after it took out the blood, is because while it is taking out the blood, ze asuk. In other words, it's busy doing something else, it's not roteach yet. Yes, it is able to take out the blood, but it's not roteach because it's asuk. That's the way the crazy place explains it. It's not hot. It's busy doing something else. Once it got rid of what it was doing, and now it's by itself, now it could really become hot. Whereas the Aruch HaShulchan says, I don't understand that. That reasoning, he says, once if it succeeds in taking out blood, it's already becoming hot, because that's how it takes out the blood. Okay, it's an interesting question. But that's the sheet of the Ran. And the Mechaber will be going with the sheet of the Ran, apparently, because he will say something to the effect that it's only after it has done its work, it has become hot. And it was after 18 minutes after inspired, not before that. And everybody else in the Ramah are going to say no, right away. And that's what the Taz and Shach paskin. And the Shach is very, very machmir in this. He's not even Mekel and Hefsed Meruba in this case. He says, don't tell me that it only becomes Roteach later, if right away. Right away. The only thing is that we're going to be in for a little bit of a surprise. Why would somebody salt meat other than just take out the blood? To preserve it. To preserve it, that means no blood is coming out. Right? If no blood is coming out, moleach oto laderech, right? You're salting something to take for the road, so you want to preserve it. You're going to salt it a lot. Would it make any difference then? So it appears to be yes, it may make a difference. The Mechaber says it makes a difference, the Gabi is something else, another detail. But it could be, and as we will see with the Mefarshim, what they say, is that it could be that in Nachiname, the reason why the Mechaber would say that it's not salty until 8 minutes later after it has drawn out the blood is because, like the crazy place said, it was busy drawing out blood. Maybe. It only gets its koach later on. But what if it's not the salt we're not using to draw out the blood? What if we're taking the salt and now wrapping up this piece to preserve it? Maybe because it's not asuk, it's not busy drawing out blood, maybe it has its koach right away. Now, the Mechaber doesn't seem to be saying that. He says clearly that in the first example, that it's only after this amount of time has passed. The only thing is that he will make a distinction between salting it to draw out blood and salting it to preserve, is that salting it to preserve, even if you rinsed the salt, it has become so salty that the saltiness is already in the meat. And even if you don't have salt, it's considered salty. Legabebim mavli and maflit into something else. That's a big chiddush too. But that's the fact. Apparently something which has become so salty. You know, they tell us that kosher meat is more salty than non-kosher meat. They can tell the salt. Why? Where is the salt? I didn't put any salt in the meat. No. There is something left over in the meat, even though because you salted it, even after you've rinsed it. It's true, that's what they say. I mean, we anyway add spices, so we never, have that opportunity to detect unsalty versus salty. It's all spiced up, cooked up, pepper, garlic, and everything. But if you were to cook raw meat, kosher meat, and non-kosher meat, and of course you can't taste it, but have a goy taste it, he'll tell you, this one is saltier than this one. Why? Because it was salted. So that's why there is a chiluk in the Mechaber between why are you salting it. If you're salting it laderech bemet, you're taking it to the road, so apparently it has much more salt. So even when you rinse out the salt later on, it's considered eno ne'echal machmat molcho. It's considered you cannot eat it because of its saltiness at that point, and therefore its din is meliach keroteach unless you soak it. You would have to soak it in water to remove that koach, that saltiness. Whereas the other one, if you just drew out the blood and you rinsed it out, you're okay. As long as you didn't rinse it out, however, it's a problem. How long is it going to be a problem? So here we have a leniency of the Mechaber going like the Shita, the what? That it only becomes Roteach at the end, and that was the leniency. But then we have the Chumrah. What's the Chumrah? Even the following day, if you didn't remove the salt, it's still Meliach Kereseach. Now let's go to the Ramah, the other ones. They want the ones that hold once you are Moleach, it becomes Meliach Keroteach, right away. They hold, at least in principle, that once that Melicha has done its job, it stops having Koach. You see how they're both opposites of each other? Even though the Ramah is going to be Machmer anyway, that as long as it's salty, it continues to pose a problem. But in principle, you have two opposite shitot. You have one shita that says it's not roteach until after it's done its job. Then it begins to be roteach. But it will remain so. As long as the salt is there, it will remain like that for a long, long time. The salt is still there. Then you have the other shita, it's roteach right away, right away, but it stops being roteach after it has done its job. Now, it appears to be that according to everybody, Meliach would be keroteach indefinitely if it's not to draw out blood. Because then we don't have the drawing out of the blood. It's not working on drawing out blood. So it's not going to stop. It didn't do it. It's going to be possibly roteach right away, right? And, it was maybe, even according to the Mechaber, maybe, but at least everybody will agree that it doesn't stop being roteach because it didn't draw out blood. Because according to the Shita that says it stops being roteach when it finished drawing out blood, here it's not drawing out blood. There would be at least a consensus that it continues to pose a problem of meliach keroteach, therefore almost indefinitely. So the only question really more is, as of what moment does it start? Because we're going to be machmer anyway. That it continues indefinitely. Yeah, we're going to at least be machmer. The question is, we have some merubah and so forth. Yeah. Now let's go to the Makor and see why so vague, or why so unclear. So the Makor, we have a Rashi and we have a Tosfos. I'll just go briefly through it. How much salt do you need? Let's begin with that. How much salt do you need for it to be meliach keroteach? So in the Gemara, it's mevor like this. We have a Gemara in Psochim and we have a Gemara in Chulin. Legabe the quantity. So the Gemara says like this: it has to be salty enough. Forget about the reason now. It makes no difference the reason. The meat, the food, has to be salty enough that you can't eat it because it's so salty. If it's not edible because it's so salty, then it can have the din of meliach keroteach. We're not talking about just putting a little bit of salt. Now the Ramah is always machmir in this area. We're not bekim. So he says we have to be machmir even if somebody was molechet like for tzli. When you take a piece of meat today to roast it on the fire, the minhag is, the halacha is still to salt it a little bit. Not as much, but you still salt it a little bit all around. So the poshup shot, that would be okay because it's only a little bit. It's not. You could eat it even with the salt on it. The Gemara seems to be saying meliach keroteach is only if it's eno necha machmas molcho. So now the question is, what does eno necha machmas molcho? That's where the machlokes begins. What did the Gemara mean? I can't eat it because it's so salty. So Rashi says in Psochim, it's so salty that it really ruins the taste. He says the lashon is sheimlicho harbe ad sheikdiach ta'amo k'tzat ve'eno ra'ui leochlo b'li hadacha. It ruined a little bit the taste. It's not enjoyable. You can't eat it unless you rinse it. That's the pshat in Rashi in Psochim. Now, according to this pshat, what would it tell you? This seems to be saying that Rashi is machmir. Okay? And it was from this, if you don't dig too deep into the words of Rashi or compare any other Rashis, it seems to be that Rashi is saying, as long as the taste is gone, in other words, the taste is so salty that I can't eat it the way it is, until I rinse it, right? As opposed to what? As opposed to Tosfos. Tosfos, Rabbeinu Tam, Chulin, they say that we're not talking about the salt that you use to draw out the blood, which is pretty salty, right?
Rabbeinu Tam, yes.
I'm sorry. No. Rabbeinu Tam says that if you salted it like enough to draw out the blood, then it's meliach keroteach. That's Rabbeinu Tam. In other words, Rabbeinu Tam says it would have to be salty as much as you use to cover a piece of meat or chicken to draw out the blood. That's pretty salty. Is that more salty than Rashi?
Rashi was in it, no?
So far, no. It depends which Rashi. The Rashi in Psochim, I'm only dealing with the Rashi in Psochim now. Right. That's where it becomes a little tricky. The Rashi in Psochim just says it ruins the taste. I have to rinse it. I can't eat it. It's too salty. All right. If I use the Rashi from Psochim, it appears to be the Rabbeinu Tam says it has to be a lot saltier for it to be meliach keroteach. So in other words, Rabbeinu Tam is being more lenient. If it was less than that, it's not called Meliach Keroseach. For Rashi Sochim, it appears to be that he's Machmir. It appears to be, I'm not sure. Now, the difficulty is that there's another Rashi in Chulin. Right. And that's interesting. The Rashi in Chulin says, you know how much salt you need? Kedei latzniah. Melichas Basar latzniah. What's latzniah? Shabasar yishtamer, as we say in Hebrew. That the meat should be preserved. Latzniah means to put away, to preserve it. Wow! That's more salt than toises. There's no argument on that. If that's what he's referring to, that's more salt than the salt you need to draw out blood, to extract the blood. Wow! So the Rashi in Chulin is more machmir than toises. I'm saying more lenient than toises. He says you need a lot more salt. The Rashi in Psachim is more machmir. So which one is it? Okay, so it's a little bit,
It's Machlokes Rashi.
Unless you learn that Rashi really is saying one of the same. He's just explaining here what he meant over there, that it's so salty that you can't say until But here it says latzniah. Yes. Yeah.
Rashi in Chulin. Rashi in Pesachim seems to have a more subjective standard in your determination as to whether it needs
No, he means everyone. No, it would be hard for anyone to eat unless you rinsed it out. Yeah. He didn't.
That could be.
No. It appears to be. The words are pretty clear as far as that it's quite salty. It's hard to eat. You wouldn't want to eat it. You would not enjoy it. It's too, unless you rinse out the salt. Yeah. Now, why would you have so much salt? Right? It could be either one. When I learned it the first time, I said it could be he holds like Tosfos too. He's not talking about why you salt it. He's giving us an example of how much salt. That is so salty that you would have to first rinse it before you would eat it. The time, Now, it could be, he would agree. The melach, like Rabbeinu Tam says, to extract the blood is bad enough. You can't eat it that way. Nobody wants to eat it. The only question is, everybody agrees that melach latzniah is much more than melach to take out the blood. Because he used the word latzniah in Chulin, it appears to be that he's more mekel.
Now,
because of the word latzniah only. That kind of salt.
In the case of latzniah, does Rashi say to remove the salt? Or
No, he doesn't say that. Those words. He used that in Psachim.
Because there it's better.
Yeah, but you would need to be madiach. To preserve, you're not going to eat it that way. You learn to preserve it.
You have to soak it in
you would have to soak it. You would have to remove all the salt if you want to eat it.
Rinsing it off won't
When it comes to eating it, you mean?
When it comes to preserve.
Yeah, in other words, once you want to eat that which was preserved, you'd have to really soak it.
Yeah. Just rinsing it off is not going to work.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
When we're talking about preserving.
Yeah, we are. In a sense, that's what you're doing. When you salt.
If it's been preserved and dried out, then you're not going to prepare to that level. Once it dries
I guess it
out,
depends what it is. Yeah. If you don't want it as salty, but you'd have to remove the salt from the surface. Obviously, that's the question. Is, do you have to soak? Well, there are certain foods that I guess you're right. They don't soak because that's the way you want it, but they're quite salty. So it depends if you can tolerate it or not. But you would have to rinse it.
Old marriages,
Yeah.
when we preserve.
Yeah.
So they didn't have the water to it.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anyway, most poskim I looked around. Most poskim hold like Rabbeinu Tam. That's the amount of salt we're going to be talking about when we say Meliach Yore Deah. It has to be at least that. Was obviously if it's more than that, it's going to be also Meliach Yore Deah. But as long as it's enough, in other words, as long as it's at least the amount of salt used to draw out blood, we're machmir, and we say Meliach Yore Deah.
Now apparently, what I have in front of
Yeah.
me, there is a standard of salt. We say Rabbi Yaakov Israel of salt used for drying meats more than
I never heard of that.
The
The Ramah. The third standard is the Ramah. The Ramah says since we're not Bekim, another time he says we're not Bekim. He says we should be machmir when there's no hefsem meruba, even if it's kashir melicha for its sli, like I mentioned before, which is very little, relatively very little. It's still salty.
Yaakov said, is it the Re? Is that the favorite?
Who mentions this? Yeah.
They bring in the name of the base.
Yeah, I have to check it out. I didn't see the Beis Yosef on this. I was going to, because there's a whole tour there I want to check out. But anyway, it could be that there are other shitas, but these are the famous ones. Rashi, Tosfot, everybody knows the Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. Ramah says if there's no hefsek movie, you should be machmer meliach keroteach, even if it's a meliach ritzli. Okay, so we said now, the gabe the time, we said that the mechaber is going to hold like the shita that once the salt is there, that it's indefinite. But it has reached the point of resicha. That's another question. When? But according to the way mechaber will explain it in Sifei, it reaches that point after it's done its job. And it appears to be from those words that the mechaber doesn't distinguish why you're salting it. It will still be that amount of time. Whereas the Ramah is going to bring the opinion of Tosfos and the Rosh that after it has gone through the shear of Melicha, the melach lost its koach. He only, of course, relies on this sheet of Behefsed Meruba. The Shach has a question on the Mechaber, and that's what I briefly began to explain. The Shach has a very good question on the Mechaber from Siman Samach Tes and Hilchos Melicha, that over there he seemed to be saying that the Melicha begins to become roteach even before the shear of the Melicha. And that's Melicha lotzidam, to take out blood. It appears very clearly that the Mechaber says it's already roteach to some extent. If that's the case, how come here he's going to say differently? In other words, what's the difference between there and here? It appears to be a contradiction, on the surface. But there's no contradictions. So the Shach says, very good. He says basically like the crazy place, he said. Actually, the other way around, not like the crazy place. The Shach says, over there by Hilchas Melicha, when it begins to draw out blood, more like the Aruch HaShulchan will say, when it begins to draw out blood, it's already beginning to do the process of something, and therefore it's already roteach a little bit. So in Hilchas Melicha, it's talking about that scenario only. You're using blood to salt the meat to draw out blood. But if we're talking about a salting of a piece of meat, not for the purposes of drawing blood, the Shulchan Aruch will hold that it does not have any resicha until at least 8 days have passed by. So it's more like the Aruch HaShulchan, not the crazy place. The crazy place was explaining that the Ran was saying it's later on, not before, because it's asuk, it's busy. The Aruch HaShulchan says, mapitom. I don't understand that kind of a reason. Afuch, and to the contrary. When it begins that process of drawing out blood, it's already working. It's becoming hot. And that's what the Shach's reasoning also in explaining the difference in the Mechaber sheet. That in Melicha he would agree, perhaps, in Hilchas Melicha, that it's already being a roteach a little bit more, because that point, that halacha is talking about blood being extracted through the salt, so there's already some heat. But here, not necessarily. Here the Mechaber is talking about salting it for whatever other reason, not to salt, not to draw blood. If that's the case, the melach doesn't have any koach here. It has to have at least 8 minutes to go by before it begins to work, before it begins to become hot. So it makes sense. That's you see, it's not a contradiction. It could be that the Mechaber actually would differentiate that, and he would hold like the Ran when there's no blood coming out. And that's how he passes here. Whereas he would agree that when it's taking out the blood, even the blood itself is becoming salty and it has a koach, like sear, like brine, to be mavli and mafrit into something else. Now, before we see it inside, there's a very important shach and taz here. The Ramah was telling us in principle that he holds in principle, like the halacha, that salt that was used to draw out blood became exhausted after it drew out blood. Basak kocho. And he says he learns that from the Tosfot and the Rosh. That's the way he understood from the Tosfot and the Rosh. That once it has done its job, basak kocho. It's no longer meliach keroteach, it no longer has the same koach. And here there's a very important shach and taz, and say no. We don't understand that in the words of the Rosh and in Tosfot. They say no, that's not what they meant. One second, see here. In other words, they agree like this. It's understood from the Tosfot and Rosh that yes, salt that was used to salt meat to draw out its blood, perhaps after the blood came out, pasakacho. But you cannot apply that svara to salting a piece of meat for other purposes. In other words, if you're not drawing, if there's no melicha here to draw out the blood, then there's never going to be a pasakocho. And therefore, there's no. One should not allow for this unless there's a big hefsek meruba. In other words, in the case of where it drew out the blood, as opposed to if the salt did not draw out the blood, there's no reason to be mekel. So basically, again, the Shach and Taz learn differently in their understanding of the Rosh and Tosfot that pasakocho is a possibility. Yes, when that salt was used to draw out blood, that they would agree. But if the salt was used for other purposes, not to draw out the blood, just to preserve it, it would be more like the Mechaber says, en kitzvah. He says, in other words, there's no time limit. There's no, it continues to have the koch. We're not going to say that pasakocho applies in every situation, which is what the Ramah appears to understand, that's what they meant, that after a certain amount of time, it stops. And they said, no, to draw out blood, it worked so hard, maybe yes, but if it's not used to draw out blood, only to preserve something, lo pasakocho. So therefore, the Shach says, halacha lemaaseh, since there are some poskim that hold that even if the Melicha was used to draw out the blood, that there's no pasakocho, even in that case, we have to be machmir in any event, in any case, and only to allow for hefsek meruba if it actually drew out the blood, and now that salt, he said, would not have the same koch. But nobody would be lenient, he says, nobody should be lenient, in any case, even in a hefsek meruba, if the salt is being used to preserve it, that salt continues to have the koch for a long time. The Ramah, however, does add an additional chumrah that is even it was salted on the one side of the meat, it's okay, it's still Melicha Yore. What's interesting about this Ramah is that in Hilchas Melicha, the Ramah argues on the Mechaber. The Mechaber says, you know what, you're supposed to salt it inside out all over. If you didn't, you just did it on one side, but the evidence it's okay. The salt is so strong that it will draw out all the blood. But the evidence. You put salt only on one side of the meat. The Ramah says, no, you have to always salt the two sides. You can't rely on Melicha on one side. Here he says, the other way around. Even if you salted one side, it's going to be called Meliach Keroteach. So you see here, the Ramah is being machmer. Whereas in Hilchas Melicha, he says you need two sides. Here it says one side, here it's called a chumrah. One side, it's already called Meliach Keroteach. Okay, so before we go into Tato Gova, I'm going to read the Mechaber and the Ramah inside. Sif Hey, Meliach she'eno yochol le'ochel machmas molchoi. Something that's salty that cannot be eaten because it's so salty. The haino, what does that mean? The haino kein meliach, similar to something that is salty, shemolchim lekdera, that you salted in order that we can eat it, that we can cook it. In other words, salting to draw out the blood. That much salt, so he holds here, like Rabbeinu Tam. There was that much salt. V'shaha, now he says, and it was on the piece of meat, this amount of salt, kedei melicha likdera, and it was there for 18 minutes. It was the exact same amount that's required for melicha likdera. So kol zman shelo yidicho mikra eno nechal machmas. As long as he did not rinse it, it's called eno nechal machmas olcho. So therefore, you have the amount of salt being like Rabbeinu Tam to draw out blood. The amount of time that it would ordinarily be required to draw out the blood. It has to have been already sitting on there 18 minutes. So the Mechaber says very clearly, it's not roteach the moment you put it on. It is roteach once at least 18 minutes went by. Ramah, ויש אומרים דלאחר ששהה במולכו שיעור מליחה, לא מקרה אחר כך רותח. Once it did the 18 minutes, it's exhausted. He quotes Tosfot, Rosh, Smag, Lechad Shita, Lechad Shinuya. Remember, the Shakata says, no, that's not what we understand in the Tosfot. So he's basically saying it because he feels that that's what the opinion of the Tosfot and Rosh is. And he says, the Letzorech Gadol Kegon Befsed Merubeh. So at least he agrees that lechatchila we don't rely on it, but Letzorech Gadol Kegon Befsed Merubeh Vehu Letzorech Seudat Mitzvah. In other words, you need both. Hefsed Merubeh and Letzorech Seudat Mitzvah. It's a big. You need it for a Suda. It's a Sheva Brachas, whatever. Yesh Lismocha Mekilim, that after 18 minutes of drawing out blood, it's weak. Ava Belavachi En Le'akeh Without it should not be lenient klal.
What is the key? What is going on? I'm salting the meat. It's drawn out the blood. What is going on?
You may ask, what are we talking about? We're talking about Basar v'chalav. Yeah, that's the next sif. It first introduces us to Melicha Yore Deah. Right. Now it's going to, after we become familiar with it.
What is the proper? I only have some meat with salted blood right now.
No. After we know all the concepts of Melicha, here, in Basar v'chalav, it's going to apply that cheese and.
Okay, but my question right now is.
Right now we have to become familiar with it.
If we have both cases of Soda and
Mitzvah and Hefsed
Merubah, then what?
Then you can rely on the opinion that says that if something was Meliach Keroteach She'eno Nechal Matchmat Molcho, if that amount of salt on it was there after 18 minutes, and it was some piece of cheese.
Oh, now we're talking about cheese.
Or nevela, but it's not Hilchos Taaruvos here. Or Iser, right? If this was treif, if it touched kosher meat, it wouldn't pose as much problem. In other words, you salted a piece of non-kosher meat, an avela, or treif, I should say, whatever. You found out later it's an avela, and then you brought some more meat. You brought some more meat to place there, and they were touching. You don't mind it. Put them all together. Oh no, we found out this is treif. Yeah, but it's already finished drawing out all the blood. That melach does not have the same koach to be considered Meliach Keroseach. It's already, the salt worked to draw out blood according to this shita,
and
therefore it doesn't aser
the meat from which the blood was drawn out.
No, it doesn't aser the meat that may have been touching it.
Why
now,
was he salting in the meat?
You didn't know that it was an avela or a treif. You found out later. You found out. The butcher came, no, we made a mistake. We should have X'd this one out. We didn't X it. They have Simanim in the slaughterhouse, and somehow it got bungled. And here you're salting it, right? And, when you salt a lot of meat together. And then you brought another batch. Oh, but this one was already done. Oh, Baruch Hashem, it's already done. Had it not been done, and it's doing now, and you have a lot of meat around, you have a big, big problem. If it's shaman. If it's not shaman, it's only kedei klipa, wherever they touched. Yeah. So anyway, So the Ramah says, in understanding Tosis and the Rosh, he doesn't differentiate it. He just says, you know what? They say that after it finished its job, or after that amount of time went by, Shir Melicha. He also says Shir Melicha. It's not Rotech anymore. You can rely on this in the Tzorech Godol, Hefsed Merubah, and Tzorech Sudas Mitzvah. Otherwise, don't be lenient on that. All right. Shacheta say, no. That's not what was meant. That was only meant you could say that by if it would actually extract the blood. It's exhausted. But if it was salted for latznia, to preserve it, and the same amount of time went by, so what? It's not exhausted. And that's what the Mechaber pretty much seems to be saying too, in a sense. Then the Ramah adds, it wasn't salted from both sides, only from one side. If it was salted, it's salty enough that it cannot be eaten with so much salt. For our purposes, it's called roteach, even though for purposes of Melicha, I told you need both sides. Here, I'll tell you one side is salty enough. If it's not salty as much as what we've established here, it just has a little bit of salt on it, it's called mechshav tzonen. It's cold. Even if it has both sides, it has to be enough salt as used to draw out blood. Again, again, we're not baki. How's somebody going to estimate? Well, it's salty, but we're not so baki. That's what he says. that even if somebody was put a little bit of salt, like you put for tzli, it's keroteach, v'tov le'achmer b'mokom she'ein hefsed meruba. Now, what's the chumrah here? You take off a klipa anyway. It's only a klipa unless it's shaman. With the shaman part, we'll see later on. But if it's not shaman, we're talking about cheat, salty, both, one of them. The most you have to deal with is a klipa. So that's why he says if there's no, unless it's a hefsed, we're going to be machmir even if it's only in melicha, like for tzli, which is a little bit. Now, Mechaber goes on to say, Meliach came, Meliach de boilo le'orcha, but if it's so salty that it's like the salt that is, amount of salt that's used to go on the road, in other words, to preserve it, afilu la'achar sheidichu, even after you rinsed it, have'eno necha machmatoch, it's still considered like you can't eat it because of its saltiness. V'chol zman shelo shor b'mayim dino kiroteach le'esor kedei klipa, and as long as you do not soak it in water, it's like kiroteach to asor kedei klipa. All right, so far so good. Now comes the din of tatar gavar. Do we say tatar gavar in Melicha or not? Remember tatar gavar?
The gavar what? The gavar.
Oh, any of the two. Does it make a difference? Does the din of tatar gavar apply in Melicha at all? It applied by tzli, by other forms of heat. Does that apply here? So it's a big machlok, yes? Basically, the Rashba and the Ran say yes. Tatar gavar applies to Melicha too. Tatar gavar is tatar gavar. It applies everywhere we said that you have Isra and Heter. It applies. Heat, any form of heat. Therefore, this will make a difference that if the tatar is salty versus if the tatar is on top. Okay? According to the Rashba, in other words, it would make a difference. The rest of the poskim hold no. There's no din of tatar gavar by Melicha, and therefore, regardless of its position, the top or the bottom, it is always going to be a kedei klipa. Remember, we're not talking about shaman right now. It's always going to be a kedei klipa, and that's what's mashur from the Mechaber's words, and I'm going to elaborate a little bit more. Ve'ein chiluk b'meliach elyon v'tofel tachton lemeliach tachton v'tofel elyon leolam. Hameliach mavliya batofel ve'eno bolem mino. It doesn't make a difference if the salty is on the bottom or the salty is on top. The rule is always the same. The one that's salty will mavliya batofel. How would you say mavliya, Ilan? It will give off its taste into the tofel and make it being absorbed into the tofel. Ve'eno bolem mino, but it will not absorb from it. The salty one will give off and it will not take. Therefore, Hilkach Basar Gvina, meat and cheese, Hameluchim, salty. They're both salty. Now we're back to reality. We're back to meat and cheese. Shenagu zeh b'zeh, that they're touching each other. Tzarich liklof shnehem. You have to peel from both of them. A klipa. Makom negiatam, where they touch the place of contact. Im echad mehem maluach v'sheni tafel. If one of them is salty and the other one is not salted, hamaluach mutar be'adacha. The salted one, you can just rinse. It wasn't affected, remember? It gives off, it doesn't receive. And the one that's unsalted is the one that needs a klipa. Now, so here the Mechaber, from the Mechaber's words, you see, it makes no difference. Elyon, tachton, right? The only thing is that in Siman Kuf Hey, in Hilchos Taaruvot, which if we don't review, we forget. When he talks about Melicha, he says something strange. Zeh she'amarnu, that which we said, be'isur meliach, veheter, tofel, right? The isur is the one that's salty, and the heter is tofel. She'im hu shamein, that if it's fat, and we haven't seen that yet, but that if it's fat, oser ad sheyeh bo shishim levatlo, when the salty one is fat, it's no longer klipa, it's still 60. That which I said that, dafka k'shahaya isur maliach lemata. That's only if the isur that was salted was at the bottom. The heter tofel is lemala. Why? Shutator gavar. Wow. Again, another contradiction. No, we said there's no contradictions. But it appears so. Here saying there is such a thing as tatar gavar by Melicha. Aval im haya heter tofel lemata, if the heter's tofel is down, and the isur that's salted is lemala, eno oseh lakedei klipa. Why? So here he clearly distinguishes that there is a din of Tatar Gover by Melicha, and here he says, no, it makes no difference. It's always a Kedei Klipa. So what's the answer? Tosfos and most poskim hold that there's no din of Tatar Gover, it's always a Kedei Klipa. But as we will see later on, there is a difference of if the piece of Meliach is shaman or not. And we saw that in Hilchos Taaruvot. And apparently, the Mechaber is going to answer, if he could, what's the big deal? Why don't you understand? In the case of Taaruvot, I'm talking about only something that is shaman. In order for the shaman to be a problem, that it's mefapea, it has to be only in the case of where it's tator govar. It's at the bottom. In Melicha, shaman does not have a koach to be mefapea ad kedei shishim if it's on top. Therefore, even if it's shaman, but it's sitting on top, it's only going to be kedei klipa. Here, we're not talking yet about shaman. And all I told you is that the kedei klipa will be regardless. Bottom or top, it's always going to be klipa. There in Taaruvot that I said there's a difference of tator gover is because I told you that the din of shaman is not klipa, it's shishim. You need shishim. There, I made an exception. So the tator gover there is a kula. In answer to your question before, is it going to be a kula or chumrah? It will end up being a kula legabi shaman. Legabi shishim, yeah.
But a kedei klipa you need over here.
Regardless. Right. You're always going to need a kedei klipa for the one that's tafel.
So legabe our general which is not shaman of Bichal Malich Keroteach.
Right.
With respect to over there, it'll end up being this one.
Right. Over there it will be kedei klipa if it's shaman on top.
Over there we only have a chumrah. Meaning that if it's shaman and at the bottom, then we'll even use it.
Right.
So it doesn't work lekula, it only works kedei klipa I'll need any.
Kedei klipa I'll always need.
Right. So tatar gavar doesn't save me from kedei.
No, it doesn't. Right.
It only introduces an additional chumrah, according to what you say.
Right.
If there's a shaman involved, and that shaman is at the bottom, kedei klipa won't even be enough, I'll need 6.
Right.
So
I was looking at it the other way around.
That it doesn't introduce it.
That if it's no, because here we're going to see that if it's shaman, right, it's not going to be a kedei klipa.
No, beg your pardon. It's going to be a shishim with tatar gavar.
Right.
But I'm never going to get rid of kedei.
Right. Exactly.
Right. So
there in discussing the din of tatar gavar, which appears to be there is a chiluk. Yes, only legabe the din of shaman.
But it's not a kula because I still need kedei.
Yes, exactly. You're right.
So tatar gavar is not going to save me the kedei.
It's not going to save you.
It'll introduce an additional chumrah. If it's shaman and at the bottom, I'll need even 6.
You always need at least a kedei klipa.
Yeah.
All right. This is where we'll start. Mitzvah Hashem will continue Thursday.